At this point, I'd like to introduce Judy, our speaker for the morning.
Morning, my name's Judy Ridgway, and I am an alcoholic. By the grace of God and the fellowship of this program, I haven't had any alcohol to drink or any other mood-altering chemicals since April the 10th of 1980. For this period of time, I'm truly grateful. I love Texas. I'm from Norman, Oklahoma. My entire family came with me. My husband, my 17-year-old son, our 7-year-old son, our 5-year-old daughter, and my law partner. And used to be, I wouldn't be able to tolerate this. However, this morning I got up at like about 5:30 and drove my husband and my oldest son to Port Aransas, because I was informed that there's absolutely no other time and the fishing's just the best it can be, and they're addicted to fishing. The two littlest kids are up in the room providing Robin with a job. The thing that I like about Texas is that when we got ready to pack, my husband said, "Should I take my boots?" And my response was, "I think they'll kill you if you don't." When I got here, there was delivered to my room a ceramic, scruffy-looking cowboy boot with flowers in it. As I left here yesterday, there were police officers out at the driveway directing drunks where to go. The thing that totally amazes me about Texas is they're still out there today, and nobody's run over them yet. In Texas, at the AA dances, the DJ dedicates songs to my friend from Oklahoma, and it's a boot-scooting song, and I appreciate that. In April of 1980, I decided that my now ex-husband had a horrid drinking problem, and somebody had better fix it, and that somebody was me. And we did an intervention on him, and we sent him to Mandan, North Dakota, because from Oklahoma, if you go to North Dakota, you can tell people you were hunting. I went up for his family week, and I don't know why I packed 2 suitcases, because I'm not one of those clothes horses. But for whatever reason, I packed 2 suitcases and headed off to Mandan, North Dakota to stay 7 days and to see him through his horrible problem with alcohol. And I got there on Monday, and they said, "The family's supposed to meet in thus-and-so room. You need to be there sharp at 8 o'clock. We begin counseling sessions at 8 o'clock. And I got there right at 8 o'clock. And there wasn't a counselor there. There was a bunch of sad-looking people there. And there were instructions on the board. We want to know your name. We want to know who your patient is. And we want to know what brought you here." And when it got to be my turn, the counselor arrived at 8:12. And when it got to be my turn, I could not contain myself. And I told them, I didn't come here and spend my hard-earned money to sit and wait for you for 12 minutes. Now, if I can get here on time from Norman, Oklahoma to Mandan, North Dakota, you can get here on time from just around the corner. What kind of a place do you run here? How are you going to set an example for people to get sober if you can't even get here on time? On Tuesday, somebody pointed at me and they said, you are an alcoholic. Now, that wasn't one of the things that I had planned a response to in my life. And although I had never thought about it, I thought, you ought to be pissed. But the weirdest sense came over me. This sense of ease and comfort came over me. And the thought that went through my mind, which I had absolutely no control over, was, there is a solution to that problem. And I felt okay. Prior to that, I had thought that I was having one long string of bad luck. That I was in the wrong place at the right time, in the right place at the wrong time. People were bugging me. They were jealous of me. They were causing me trouble. Most of all, I thought that if there was a God, He was testing me mighty hard. The general stay at one of those institutions is about 28 days. And on my 7th week, they said, you've done pretty good. We're going to let you out for 4 hours to go to town. And I thought, this is cool. We're going to go to town. Now, I knew the rules of the place, and the rules were everything that goes out and everything that comes in is checked thoroughly. And so I was not going to be ignorant enough to do anything stupid, like try to bring drugs or alcohol back into the place. And I behaved myself. I went downtown, and there was this great big sign that said S-A-L-E, calling my name. I went into a shoe store, and I bought 17 pairs of Papagala or something shoes. They were on sale, 2 for 1. And I came back to my institution, and I was mighty pleased with myself for making such a bargain and not getting into any alcohol or drugs, and the people at the desk were not that pleased. And they said, we're going to call your counselor. And I said, what for? I didn't drink, I didn't do any drugs, and I didn't mess around. And they said, we're going to call your counselor. And my counselor's a little old tiny skinny lady with gray hair wadded up right here and these wands sticking through it. And some people called her Lois the Horrible. And Lois got there, and we sat and we watched the counselors go through every pair of shoes, every single piece of paper, pull the bottom thing out of those shoes, and check them for drugs. And I kept on telling them, I don't know why you people are doing this. It's really unnecessary. There are no drugs in those shoes. You can trust me. And they finished their jobs, and there weren't any drugs in those shoes. And then my counselor said, you're going to have to return those shoes. And I said, wait a minute. All the stuff that you guys have been putting before me deals with alcohol, deals with drugs, deals with lying, cheating, and stealing. And I want you to know that I have not done any of those things, and I don't see why I need to return the shoes. And she said, you're going to return the shoes. And I learned that operative word in Alcoholics Anonymous, yes. That was my first point of humility in the program. And I had no idea that that was going to be my lesson for quite a few years after that. When I got out of that institution, they told me 2 things. They said, 1, get a sponsor, 2, go to meetings. And so I went to a meeting, and I pulled up in my black Cadillac and sat outside and sat there. And finally somebody came over to my window and they knocked on the glass and they said, "Are you going inside?" And I said, "Why? Do I look like I need to go inside?" And they said, "It's okay. I'll walk you inside." And I don't remember anything else about that meeting, but I do remember that somebody would walk with me to go inside. And there was not one, but there were two. And it felt okay if there were two. On the sponsorship deal, they said, find somebody who's got what you want and do what they did to get it. And I looked around after a few weeks or months or a while, and I found somebody that had what I wanted, and I was willing to do what they had done to get it. And she was a size 5, blonde, blue-eyed, long, polished fingernails, snappy dresser. She drove a blue Datsun 280Z. She had a husband, which I did not have at that time, because that old treatment center told me you might ditch this one. And she had kids, and she had a 2-story house, and I thought, AA is going to be all right. My second sponsor came along fairly quickly thereafter, and she was very service-oriented. And I learned things like ashtrays and chairs, and I learned you go to every conference that's on the map within 150 miles, and you go every time the doors of that meeting house are open. And you drive people there, and you pick people up, and you wash dishes, and you always say yes. And one day that sponsor got sick, and I didn't understand that. And I thought, there probably is a God, and He's testing again. And she had bone marrow cancer, and I stayed with her in the hospital a lot, and I did not understand, being a year or so sober, why they give morphine and alcohol to a person who is dying. And I was so rigid that I could not live with the, drinking on her deathbed. And I couldn't talk to her about it because she was gone. And she died within about 10 days after the sickness hit her. And I certainly didn't understand. And then I thought, this AA is not going to be okay. Because at least if you do what they're saying, it ought to be easier and it ought to be happier. It took me a while to get my third sponsor, and my third sponsor might be what they were talking about when I first came in the door. It is the sponsor that I have today, and we are nothing alike. She's old, and I wasn't. She had lots of gray hair, and I didn't have any at the time. She lived on about $3,000 a year, and I thought you ought to have that for at least a month. She buried her garbage in her yard. She used so much electricity that when OG&E came out to do an energy audit, she didn't hit the bottom of the scale and they couldn't do the audit. She did smoke cigarettes and drink coffee, and I knew that that was okay because I was a smoking, cigarette, drinking coffee girl at the time. When I was drinking, I had had a lot of problems with stealing. And I was hoping that Alcoholics Anonymous could cure that problem. And I learned that you get to that part of your life when you're on about steps 6 and 7. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. humbly ask Him to remove our shortcoming. And it took me several years before I was willing to work on those steps. One of the hardest problems was when we would go to a restaurant, my sponsor would put creamers and sugars in her purse, and she'd take the jelly, and I was telling her, how long have you been going to meetings? Have you ever heard anything like, take what's yours and leave the rest? And she said, I don't consider this stealing. Do you? I said, yeah, I do. And she said, that's fine. If you consider it stealing, don't take it. We went to a conference, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the conference might have been in Texas, a place called Canyon. And it's like at a church camp, and you cannot wear shorts, and you can't wear halter tops, and you can't wear anything less than that. And I thought, boy, this AA is not gonna be too cool. And then my sponsor said, we're going to go for a little swim. And I thought, now you can't wear swimming suits because they didn't even let you wear shorts here. And she walks me down in the woods way far away from the camp, and pretty soon there's a waterfall and there's a lake, and it's beautiful. And I had never stopped to see water glistening on the little ripples in a lake. And it was awesome. And I was sitting there watching the water ripples in the lake, and then all of a sudden I turned around and she was naked. I kept my mouth shut this time. And I know that in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you do what your sponsor does. And I thought, this AA is going to be all right. And when you're trying to deal with a 30-year-old female sober single person, that was the kind of sponsor I was ready for. For many years, I ate lunch at my sponsor's house every Wednesday. And every Wednesday, I would come there ready to tell her what he had done, what they had done to me at Target, what was happening with the traffic down the street, what was happening at work. And I'd walk into her yard, and she would start talking about the jonquils. And she would talk, and we would walk around the yard, and I'd sit there biting my lips, like, when is she going to get done so I can tell her about my problems? And she would say, isn't it amazing how long that stem is? Look at the brilliance of the color that God has created right here in my backyard. Have you ever seen anything so intense as that yellow in the color of that flower? Look, there's bees. Can you hear the birds? And by the time we ate, I forgot what I was there for. And it worked every week, every month, every year, from when I was 2 years sober until now. About a year ago, my sponsor got hardening of the arteries. And I didn't know how to handle that. For years, she had gone with me everywhere I went. I thought that she would be there forever. And when she started not being able to remember things, I was devastated. And I withdrew, and I quit going to lunch. And it was back to that same old deal, God, you're testing me again, don't do it. And finally, I heard at a meeting, somebody was talking about their mom or their dad or something having Alzheimer's, and they said it doesn't affect their relationship with God. Oh. The reason that I had this lady for a sponsor was not because of the jonquils, not because of skinny dipping, not because she conserved on utilities, but because she was the most ephemeral person in that AA meeting room. She didn't walk, she glided. She had 2 problems the entire 14 years. One was with the IRS and one was with her toilet. That's why this person was my sponsor, because she was in God's hands. And I knew it. And I knew that her soul was still in God's hands, and it didn't matter a hoot where her mind was. I stopped taking her with me when I spoke for a while, and then after I got my spiritual experience, I started taking her with me again, you know. And she is more fun now than she was 14 years ago. The woman is totally in the moment. She can't remember the last stop sign. She doesn't harbor any resentments. She has no idea what you did to her yesterday. She does not live in the past. She also doesn't live in the future. Because if you tell her yesterday, we're going to go to Corpus Christi to talk, she forgets about it. When you take her somewhere, she doesn't know anything other than, we're going. Right now, we're going. And you ask her about it a week from there, she doesn't remember going. But she has a hell of a good time when she's there. And it is a grand experience for me, because I believe that little children and people who have lost their mind are in the hands of God. And I need to be more like those people, because it's my mind that did me a lot of damage when I was trying to get sober. My mind always told me if you saw it, you liked it, go ahead and get it. And that even involved when you picked up other people's stuff. And I had trouble with stealing even in sobriety. I stole them in a restaurant partnership, and there's a lot of cash in a restaurant. A lot of cash. And, you know, Uncle Sam has been not one of my idols. And if you can get by with it, you ought to do it. Uncle Sam didn't really deserve it. And so I stole from my partners in the restaurant, and I go to my sponsor and talk to her about it. And she says, well, you got to pay the money back. And I said, well, I could just tell them I'm honest now. I've had my AA spiritual experience. And after I paid the money back, they took away all my jobs. And I thought, you know, this business of making amends is just not too cool, because people ought to bless you and reward you. And that's not what was happening. After I'd been in the program 3 or 4 years, I went to Colorado to go skiing. And I went with some AA people because for a number of years in my life, I couldn't venture out of the fellowship. I had to take the fellowship with me everywhere I went. And we went into a store to shop before the ski lift opened. And this lady that was minding the store, she said, I've got to take my son to school. Would you watch the shop for me while I do that? And I was so excited. my mind went immediately to sterling silver, about 6 pair in my pocket, fur bag. I can get that underneath my coat. I can go ahead and put 2 ski outfits underneath my clothes, and there it was. Click, 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 click. And then I remembered this song. Sometimes I listen to those Holy Rollin' radio stations, I guess they are. And this song talked about the man who was watching the store. And the man who was watching the store did a good job. He didn't take anything. And so there's this side of my mind doing the man who's watching the store, and this side of my mind is doing the stuff I can take. And the miracle of the whole deal, the God holding my hand, was when that woman came back, I had 4 items up on the counter, and that was it. My pockets were clean. She trusted me, and that wasn't the big deal. The big deal was I was trustworthy. And I had never been trustworthy before. From that day forward, God has lifted theft from my hands. I practiced law for a living and went through law school drunken and drugging. And used to do an assortment of things before going to court. Drinking was not one of them because you can smell alcohol. Pot wasn't one of them. But any kind of pills you could take, including LSD, was just a fine day in court. When you're a lawyer on drugs, you tend to represent people who can supply you. And for the first 5 years of my practicing law, I was a criminal lawyer. And I was pretty good at it. One day when I was walking out of the courthouse after having had this character defect lifted, there was a hairbrush sitting on the little stone dealies outside of the courthouse. And sometimes I don't go through thinking processes. And I had that hairbrush inside my briefcase before anybody could say Jack Robinson. And that was on a Friday, and I go to AA Saturday morning at 8. And by Saturday morning at 8, I was really tired. I hadn't had a whole lot of sleep. And there I am talking to my Saturday morning home group AA meeting and telling them I stole the hairbrush from the courthouse. And nobody there thought that was too serious. It was killing me. And I had to leave in the middle of an AA meeting and go back to the courthouse on a Saturday morning, hoping there were no other attorneys around, and take that hairbrush out of that briefcase and put it back. Because just being sorry and being apologetic was not satisfactory. I had to take some action that applies to me. Doesn't necessarily have to apply to you. It just applies to me. At one of the conferences that my sponsor and I went to, I was praying in this little chapel, and I had decided that I was back with this first sponsor and I wanted to be a size 5 bad. And I was a-praying and a-praying and a-praying in this chapel. And I was a-praying, come on, God, let's get this 6 and 7 deal down. Let's remove the food. No more candy. Come on, let's do it. And I got so enthusiastic about God's hands at taking care of me that I walked out of there and I knew I'd been saved. I knew I had been saved. I never smoked another cigarette. I went right to the lunch parlor and ate a big lunch. Somebody knows the reason that I didn't smoke the rest of the package of cigarettes I had with me. I don't know. If you give up smoking, you might as well give up coffee drinking, because they're not fun apart from each other. Started talking to my sponsor about giving up smoking. She was going to die before I was, and she needed to get with it. That's when I heard that answer. Quitting smoking's okay for you. Not okay for me right now. One of my sponsor's favorite steps in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is the 9th step, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. My sponsor takes that step very literally. And so when it came time to deal with the 9th step, and I had confided in her in one of my many 4th steps, I take them annually, about, while I was in law school, I worked at the local nut house, Central State Hospital, at nighttime. And the way that they handle crazy people who are also in trouble with the law is a lot of drugs and leather straps. And I figured they've got the leather straps, why do they need the drugs? And so I would go to work at 11 o'clock at night and do the patient's drugs and get off work at 7 o'clock in the morning just loving my job. And I told my sponsor about that, and she said, I suggested, actually, there's like an AA meeting at the hospital, and I said, they need some big books, let me buy them some big books. And she said, well, Judy, I think you might want to try going to the AA meeting at the hospital. I said, okay, I'll do that. And I went to one meeting, and I came back, and I told her I went, and she said, I was planning on you going until you learned something. And about 18 months later, of weekly meetings, I knew why I was there. There was a man in a wheelchair, and he had drool dripping down his mouth, and his hair was not combed, and his teeth were yellow, and he had grass in the cuff of his pants leg. And we were not people who would normally mix. I was not a person who would normally even listen to him. But at that meeting, he said, I've been treating myself like a dog, and I don't want to live like a dog anymore. And that was it. I had not even realized that I didn't want to live like a dog. When I learned something, then I was allowed to not go to that meeting anymore. And I've still been going ever since. I was telling my sponsor about the books that I stole from the OU Law Library. Because, they get all these law students doing one project, and everybody's running to the library, and you can't check the dadgum books out, and, it's just inconvenient to leave them there. And about 10 years had gone by now since I had stolen the books, and I said, I think it would be a good idea if I would contribute some money to the law library. And my sponsor said, I was thinking more along the lines of you packing up the books in a grocery sack and return them to the library and pay for their misusage. And my fussing was, I am an attorney in this town. Don't you understand what that means? And as I was carrying 2 grocery sacks full of law books into the law library and handing them to the head librarian and saying, I am Judy Ridgway. I practice law here in Norman, and I stole these books from the library about 10 years ago, and here they are. And then you're supposed to pause and wait to see what your consequences are, And that lady was another one of those unappreciative world people. who raised her eyebrow and took the books and the check. And I was telling my sponsor about this blackout where when I arrived, there was a wreck all around my car on the highway, and I knew, you've got to get out of here. And I hightailed it out of there in my silver Cadillac and drove the car home, had it picked up by somebody from Texas. At that time, Texas was the place where you dispose of stolen articles, stolen goods, and wrecked cars. And had that car hauled off to Texas. And after I was sober about 5 or 6 years, I'd pass through this intersection, and I'd start getting those thump, thump. And one of the things that happens when you get sober is you not only develop trustworthiness, I was developing a conscience. And the conscience didn't feel good. And I told my sponsor, I've got this movement in me. Call it the hand of God if you want to. And I think it's time to do something about this. She said yes. And I said, I've got this chain medallion thing, and I'm going to put it in the collection box at church the next time I go to church. And she said, well, I kind of had in mind that you might find those people that you ran into. And you might directly make amends to them. And my fussing went something like, says in the statutes of the state of Oklahoma that lawyers can be disbarred for committing crimes of moral turpitude, and leaving the scene of an accident with injury is a crime of moral turpitude. That step says would injure them or others. It has been 7 years or whatever since that accident, and these people will be emotionally disturbed by me presenting myself today. They have already worked out that issue. They have gone to therapy and they are healed. I am supporting my child from the divorce, my little boy, who needs to rely on his mother and his mother's income. And that qualifies for would injure them or others. And she said, well, perhaps you're right. And maybe you need to go to someone more spiritual than I. And she sent me to a monk at a local church-type place. And I thought, why are you doing this? He's not alcoholic. He's not in the program. He didn't know beans about beans. And I thought, now I'm going to tell him this story, and he's not going to understand the deal. He doesn't know steps and amends and this kind of stuff. And I told him what I wanted to do, and I knew that monks would be impressed with gold. Because I had been raised in that church, and I knew what kind of church it was. And I told him what I thought I ought to do, and he told me what he thought I ought to do. And he said, I think you ought to find those people and make direct amends to them. And I found out later they've got the book of Alcoholics Anonymous in that monastery. I hired a private investigator and told him that I had a client who had been in an automobile accident and needed to locate these people. And he produced a file this thick for my client. More information than I ever wanted to know. There were 4 people in that car. It was a yellow small car. The car was totaled. 2 of the 4 people went to the hospital. I was petrified because I did not trust God's hand. I believed that I was going to be disbarred. The district attorney was going to come down and handcuff me and take me away. And I was just, I'd been at meetings where people had to do time for the crimes they committed. And I thought, this is not going to be too cruel. And I thought that these people that were in that automobile accident, they're going to have a heart attack. And then I'm really going to feel bad. And I finally said, perhaps you're right, to my sponsor. And I wrote a letter. Thank God it was not person to person. I wrote a letter and I said, I'm Judy Ridgway. I was the person that caused your automobile accident so-and-so years ago. And I want to do anything that I can to make you whole, including paying for the damages and anything else that you feel is right, because I choose to live differently than I've lived in the past. And in a day or two, I got a call from this woman. And she told me that her husband, who had been in the accident, and how he was injured, and that he had died since, not from the accident. And she told me about her daughter and how she was injured in the accident. And then she told me, I have no idea why you came forward now. I just don't understand it. I would never have been able to find you. And she said, I so appreciated your letter. When I got your letter, I started crying. And I said, is there anything that I can do to make you whole? And she said, I have a grandson who has a problem with alcohol. And she said, do you think he could go to an AA meeting? The woman told me that receiving my letter had renewed her hope. It had renewed her faith. And that she knew from that moment on that her grandson was going to be okay. And that woman thanked God for my existence. And she ended that conversation with, if there's anything I can do for you, please call me. I have never had a sense of dignity until that moment. I hadn't had a sense of dignity during my drinking, and I had not had a sense of dignity in my sobriety. I had not believed that God had me in His hands every day, all day, until that telephone conversation. Excuse me. That one's going to sound really good on the tape. When I told my sponsor about the birth of my first child by the first husband whom I divorced when I got sober, I told her that I am great at reading books and figuring out how to fix myself, And I read this book, and it said when you're pregnant, the big decision to be pregnant is, what do people do to have grown-up adult lives? They get married. So I wore my halter top and my blue jeans and down to the courthouse one day and grabbed this guy I've been living with and said, come on, let's go get married. Maybe things will get better. And we did, and then it was kind of like, well, let's have a kid. They kind of organize your life, and we did. And I read in this book, you ought not drink when you're pregnant. And I thought, you got it. I'm going to do this deal right. And I didn't touch a drop of alcohol for 7 months, and that's all the longer I could hold the pregnancy. But they didn't say anything about cocaine and pot and those other things, and so I just went right on down enjoying that pregnancy. And that child weighed 3 pounds when he was born, and he stayed in a incubator for a couple of months, and I had no sense. It didn't cross my mind that the child his condition may have been caused by my usage. But in sobriety, that kind of crossed my mind, and I told my sponsor about it, and it was time to make amends to him, and I said, well, and by then, he was like 8 or 10 years old or something, and it was like, I'll get him a new bicycle. And my sponsor said, I was thinking more along the lines of you spending time with the child. I was thinking more along the lines of him growing up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And even though he's fishing this morning, deep sea fishing, I carry him with me a lot of places. And I go a lot of places with him. And I go to sports car, Corvette looking places, and I have a good time. And I go to rock and roll concerts and have a good time. And my son is 17 years old. And so far, he's got quite a bit of that Al-Anon rescue, that poor girl will need me in him. But he hadn't been arrested yet, like his mama. And he hadn't been married and divorced yet, like his mama. And he's not drunk and using every day, like his mama. And it's a blessing. I believe firmly that generation by generation, my grandpa blew his brains out in the grain elevator in Guyman, Oklahoma, because an article came out in the paper about him having sex with a sheep. And back then it really embarrassed our family. But generation by generation, alcoholism is going to miss our family more frequently than not. Because that 17-year-old and the 7-year-old and the 5-year-old are growing up in these rooms. And they'll know where to come if they have a problem. April 19th, 1995. I have formed a relationship with Alcoholics Anonymous. I felt warm here. I felt welcomed here. I felt loved here. I had formed a relationship with one other human being on this earth, my sponsor. We got snowbound in Arkansas, heading to Alabama one time, and she read the 12 and 12 in the lobby of this Days In type place. And when she reads the 12 and 12, she doesn't read it silently. She reads it sentence by sentence to me aloud. She reads, I comment. She reads, I comment. After you've been with her a few years, you kind of get over being embarrassed. What happened when we did get in the car and start heading back to Alabama was I had a feeling I like her more today than I did yesterday. And I had never had that feeling in my whole life about anybody. All of my relationships had started off with a big bang and gone downhill from then. I had developed a relationship with my sponsor and with Alcoholics Anonymous. For entertainment purposes in sobriety, I'd been trained as a masseuse. Keep it clean. And immediately after the bombing in Oklahoma City, the masseuse school that I went to did volunteer work down at the Southwestern Bell building, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I had never worked with anybody that wasn't in AA. And when you're low man on the totem pole, they give you the midnight to 6 a.m. shift. And during the day I would practice law. And at nighttime I would go down and do massages one after the other on the necks and arms and shoulders and feet of the rescue workers. I formed my third relationship then. I had never felt a part of anything, not a part of the community, not a part of a church, but being able to physically do something. I didn't use money, and I didn't use thinking. I used the only manual labor that I had to offer. I was so grateful to God that He gave me some little place where I could do something. At some point in all that, they had like a meeting of all the volunteer people down in front of the bomb site. And I didn't have to have my sponsor go with me. I didn't have to have AA go with me. I went there by myself. And I held hands with total strangers. And I felt okay. And I hugged total strangers. And I felt okay. And I had bonded with one other group outside of the walls of these rooms. And I was so grateful. What God has planned for me is so much more intense than what I have planned for myself. And I got here on Friday and I just kept on looking up at the poster board. It says, "In God's hands." And I thought, oh, yes. Some point in my sobriety, maybe 7 or 8 years, 9 years sober, I was back to that. Okay, God, I got sober. Where's this man in my life? Going to all of those AA dances. I found one. I had to make a list of everyone I knew, and I wrote out beside their name what they were good for. The ladies understand. Some men you talk business with. Some men you play racquetball with. Other men buy dinner and eat at nice restaurants. Other men climb mountains and have a lot of animals. And I put down each of the qualities that I thought each of these people had to offer, and since God was so slow about what he was doing, I picked one. And he'd been a friend of mine for several years, and I asked him to marry me. And he lives in Washington, D.C., and I live in Norman, Oklahoma. And he's black, and I'm white, and he's Jewish, and I'm sometimes go to church. And he said, Judy, I love you, but we're not going to get married. And I knew that was the one. That was the perfect one because, you see, we could kind of live in a motorhome and kind of transport back and forth between Washington and Oklahoma. And pretty soon then, this private investigator that I had hired for my client's hit-and-run accident showed up in my office, and he announces, I'm sober. And I said, well, good. Didn't know you were drunk. And he said, I'm sober. I'm an alcoholic. You know about that. And I just got sober, and I thought I'd come and tell you because I knew you were in AA. And I said, well, fine. And you know how it is when you're old in sobriety. You got to take those newcomers to meetings. And I took this newcomer to a meeting, and it would embarrass me to no end because he would tell people, I've got 6 months of sobriety. He started out with 2, 3, 4, worked up to 6 months. I just thought I'd hit the high point. And then he would tell people, I live at home with my mom and my dad. And then he would tell people, I don't have a car. And I had been watching women 13th step in and out of the doors, and I thought, I don't want anybody thinking bad of me. When we go to AA meetings, can't you just listen? Newcomers are supposed to listen. And I called Larry Kay, who's a friend of mine, a priest in the program in Oklahoma. And I said, Larry, God is not doing his deal on this finding a man. And something's got to happen. It's got to happen pretty quick because, I'm getting old. And, and I told him what I'd been doing, and I told him I'd been taking this newcomer to meetings. And Larry said, well, what about him? And I said, Larry, he's boring. And he said, Judy, for you, boring is wonderful. I really think you need to pay more attention to this boring guy. And Boring and I got married about 8 months later. Wasn't in my plan. Was in God's hands. What's more amazing is Boring and I are still married. And Boring and I tried to have a child, and we couldn't. I kept on having miscarriages, and I was back to that thing, God, you're testing me. You're testing me. And I've made it this far, you can quit testing. And so we decided to adopt, and when you're a lawyer, you can do that fairly quickly. In about 4 days, we had a child. for $69. Those are the filing fees for an adoption. And he is just real cute. He's got blue eyes and red hair, and his behavior is such now, and his family history is such, that we are convinced that he is the fetal alcohol syndrome baby. And God has given me probably what I deserved, and definitely my key to heaven. Charles visits with his natural mother, and we visit with the natural grandparents. And it is such a miracle to firmly believe that the more love you have in your life, the better off you are. And today I am able to share my son with his natural family. Today I am able to share my husband with deep sea fishing. When we quit trying to have a child, I got pregnant. And I was sitting in church one day, and I was a little preface to this. One of the fourth steps that I did was a fourth step on an abortion. When women are drinking, when this woman is drinking, pregnancies are just, a passing thing, and they're kind of in the way of drinking. And at the time, I decided to have an abortion, didn't really think about it. It's just, that's what you do when you have a problem. And after you get sober and this conscience starts developing, and by now I've got trustworthiness, and I've got dignity, and I've got a conscience. And part of my amends to this unborn child, which I chose to kill, was to write the child a letter. And Larry promised me that if you write the child a letter, and if you just let God have a hold of your hand, the child will have a sex, and the child will have a name, and you will know. And you will be bonded with the soul of this child. And I did that, and my child at the time I made the amends was about 12 years old, and she was a girl. And she was named Amy, and I had no idea where that name came. But I can guarantee you that when I sit quiet, my God talks to me, and it's real clear. I was sitting in church pregnant with this child, and they were doing a John the Baptist doodah thing where they were naming the kid, And I talk about this in here because out there, they put you back in those institutions with leathers and drugs. And I had a stirring in my belly, and I knew that the child inside of me was a girl, and I knew that her name would be Amy. And God blessed us with a sober girl named Amy, who's now 5 years old. And I was totally in awe that God would let me, who had had such utter disregard for humanity, join in His creation, be a part of creating something. I have learned so much from those 3 children. I was coming home from work one day, and I was crazed, just crazed. And I got home and I started my routine, lots of fussing. In our house we have 2 rules. Number 1 is use words. Number 2 is no fussing. And I was a fussing, and that Charles came over and he said, "Mama, I can fix it." And he said, "You lie down." And he went and got his baby powder, and he came over and he pulled up my shirt and he put baby powder on me. And he rubbed it in. And he said, "There now, you're okay." And I was. It is totally amazing to me that God would decide that I have a child at 40. A sober child who freely talks about AA on the airplane. "Mama, when we get there, are we going to go to AA?" Do I have to go to those AA meetings? As a result of Corpus Christi, I am now in the process of teaching my children the word program. In Oklahoma, in my hometown clubhouse, there's a man around there that says, "Ain't no big deal." He says, "Ain't no big deal," all the time. Except when his fishing rod was stolen. I learned, ain't no big deal. I teach my family, ain't no big deal. And when Amy was about 3 years old, she was in the bathroom and she'd gotten into my makeup stuff. And it was all over the place. I mean, everywhere, over the toilet and the counter and the kid. And I walked in there and I was just like this. And she said, "Mama, is this a big deal?" Beware of children who are raised in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Amy was coloring, and she was young and couldn't stay in the lines, and her brother was telling her, "Amy, you're not doing it right. That's ugly. Can't you stay in the lines?" And Amy turned around to him and she said, "Charlie, it's my best, and it's good enough." I have been horse crazy for hundreds and hundreds of years. I have been horse crazy ever since I was a little girl. And I used to ride my bicycle and play like it was a horse. And I would walk around on my hands and knees and eat oatmeal out of a dish. And one of the things that God's hands did for me is it moved my family to the country. We moved from town to country to 40 acres in August of this year. And we have a pond, and we have a winding driveway and a log house up on the hill, and we have a meadow, and we've got trees, and we've got ducks. And out in that pasture we have 2 horses. And it is a Norman Rockwell setting, if ever there's been one. And that collie follows that little boy out to the gate where that yellow and black school bus picks him up. And my husband indulges me a lot, and there's statues all over the place. And I love them. St. Francis is sitting there, watching his woods, praying his prayers. Other people in statues are standing around on our ranch. And what I've always wanted to do was see a baby colt be born. And that is still on my list of things to do. But I bought this old mare, and I was figuring on breeding her. And I don't know beans about horses. And I took her over to this breeder and said, do the deal. And he said, okay. And then I went to someplace north, Minnesota, I think, to a conference, and the breeder called me up there, and he said she is not standing for it. And I said, well, what's wrong with her? He said, I don't know. Guess you just got a bum one. Went